I'm Ryan from ExtremeTerrain.com, and in this video we're going to be doing a basic build on this Jeep behind me. This is a four-door 2018 JL, and in the process of doing that build we're going to show you what size tire you can fit on this Jeep in stock trim without a lift kit installed on it, what issues you may or may not run into with that larger size tire, and then go ahead and install a lift and show you what the big benefits to having a lift kit installed on your Jeep are when you're running that bigger set of tires. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, that way you can check out some detailed product review videos of all of the different items that we're going to be installing on this Jeep and all of our other great 2018 JL content. So the Jeep that we're going to be working on today is a four-door 2018 JL Sport, and why that matters is that the Rubicons are going to come with a couple of different parts on them. A Rubicon's going to come with a set of 33-inch tires, and they are also going to be a mud terrain tire out of the factory, and it's also going to have a higher clearance fender on it, meaning that the fender is moved up a little bit. So larger tire, more clearance right out of the factory. We're not going to be talking about that. We are going to be building the Sport here. So the fenders are going to be a little bit lower, and this has a 32-inch tire on it right out of the factory, and they're obviously not a mud terrain. So you are going to be able to go off-road, you're going to be able to drive on-road, you're not going to have any clearance issues. Of course, you would expect that coming right out of the factory. The suspension is designed to handle the size tire that's installed on the Jeep. If you do want to go up to a slightly larger tire, a 33, you're probably not going to run into a ton of issues. If you're going to be installing a 35-inch tire, you're going to be getting a little bit closer to where you may or may not have some rubbing issues. And if you install a 37-inch tire without a lift kit, chances are you're going to have a lot of rubbing issues, but we are going to show you that in just a second. So if your goal is to run a 35-inch tire and you're just staying on the road, you can usually get away with that without installing a lift on your Jeep. So for now, let's go ahead and bolt a set of 35s up to this Jeep, flex it a little bit, and take it for a drive just to see if we have any sort of rubbing. So as you can see, these 35 1250 by 17s are significantly larger than the 32s that came off of this Jeep. They're going to be a taller tire, they're also going to be a wider tire, and this is a mud terrain. This is Nitto's Trail Grappler. So as you can see, it's going to have a really large lug here with lots of space in between, which is going to help the tire clean itself out when you're off-road. If it gets completely caked in mud, it becomes a slick, you have no traction. So again, these large openings here are designed to clean out the tire, give you your grip back. All of the large lugs do have some siping in there that allows the tire to contour around any obstacles that you might be driving over, again, just giving you maximum traction. So this is going to be a very good off-road tire. The downside, if you want to call it that, of a mud terrain tire on the road is that it is going to make a little bit more noise, and it is going to wear a little bit quicker than a all-terrain or a highway style tire. So do keep that in mind. So we are going to get this Jeep down on the ground. We're going to turn lock to lock. We're going to see if we have any clearance issues with this bigger, wider tire, and also check the clearance between the fender flare and the top of the tire. My first impression is I really like it. I like the look of a big tire and a small lift, especially if the suspension is set up for a lot of down travel. Now, as you can see, there is not a lot of clearance here between the bottom of the fender and the tire. There's also not going to be a lot of clearance between the bumper and the control arm when you have a big wheel and tire on the Jeep like this. So this is where you can get into some trouble if you're gonna try and take the Jeep off-road and do any sort of articulating. On the road, you're probably gonna be just fine, and we're gonna take this out on the street and just check it out, but you're not really gonna get this much travel. We shouldn't have any issues. So we're obviously not in an off-road situation here, but what we are simulating is one. So if you were to go off-road with this Jeep in stock trim, except for the larger 35-inch tires, this is something that you could possibly come across. Now, this is really a maximum articulation, maximum flex situation with the front and rear sway bars still connected. And as you can see out back here, we have not just rubbing, but heavy contact between the big 35 and the fender flare. And if I poke my head underneath the Jeep, I can see that there's still a good bit of space between the bottom of the jounce bumper and the bump stop pad on the axle, which means there's nothing to keep this tire from traveling even further up into the fender, which can cause damage to the fender flare, the fender itself, the tire. It can really cause a lot of different issues. So this is certainly something you're going to want to keep in mind. If you do decide to take your Jeep off-road with 35s but an otherwise stock suspension, you will have some rubbing issues, especially in the back here. You'll want to possibly look into some bump stop extensions to keep this from happening. Now let's swing around to the front of the Jeep. And obviously you can see that there's still space here. We are not making contact between fender and tire. And if you poke your head under the Jeep in the front, there's actually much less space between the bottom of the jounce bumper and and that jounce plate. So this may travel up just a little bit more as that jounce bumper compresses, and you may end up with some light rubbing here, but I don't think it's going to be nearly as severe as in the back. So up front here, you could get away with running a large set of 35-inch tires off-road without adding a bunch of bump stop extension with an otherwise factory suspension system. Now what we're gonna do is take the Jeep for a ride and see if we have any clearance issues. All right, now that we got the Jeep on the road here, I'm gonna do just a couple of low speed turns here in the parking lot, and really not feeling any rubbing. We didn't see any when we had the Jeep inside, so I wasn't expecting to have any major differences out here. If you have a little bit more back spacing on the wheel, if you were running a 1350 or a 1450, a wider tire, you may have some rubbing. If you went with a wider wheel, you may have some rubbing. So this setup that we have now, 17x9, 4.5-inch back spacing, 12.5-inch tire, no rubbing when we turn lock to lock at low speed. So we'll take this thing for a quick spin around the road here and just make sure we don't have any rubbing. So I did cut the wheel hard over to the lock there, going with a little bit of speed when I whipped around there. No rubbing at all with this setup. If you're going off-road and you're trying to flex the thing out, you are going to have some clearance issues. You are going to want to modify the suspension, even if it's just adding bump stop extensions. But if driving on the road, I wasn't expecting to have any sort of up and down rubbing of the tire on the fender. And so far, no real clearance issues with this setup and a stock suspension. So we did install a set of 37-inch tires on this Jeep in stock trim, and obviously this is not going to work for you. Even if you're just driving on the road, a normal bump is going to take up this much space. You are going to put the tire into the fender. That's just not going to work, let alone all of the other clearance issues you are going to rub when you turn lock to lock. You're probably going to rub on a factory front bumper. 37s are just not going to work on a stock Jeep. So we've seen what this stock Jeep looks like on 35s and 37s, even under some articulation. Now let's throw a lift kit on it and give it a little bit more room, big tires. So the lift kit we decided to install to give some more room for some big tires is the Skyjacker 3.5 to 4-inch lift kit with dual rate coils and the M95 monotube shocks. This is going to be an inexpensive and fairly basic lift kit. Doesn't include a ton of components in it. However, they are going to be some pretty decent components, and they are going to allow us to run a bigger tire on the Jeep. Skyjacker says you can run a 37 with this lift kit, but we're going to go ahead and test both 35s and 37s. So you're going to get all 4 new coil springs, and these are going to be Skyjacker's dual rate springs. So you're going to have a stiffer rate and a lighter rate all within the same spring. That's going to help the spring from fully compressing. This kit does come with bump stop extensions. That's also very important in keeping the springs from going into coil bind. When the coils actually touch, that can damage the spring. So those bump stop extensions that come in the kit are very important. You're going to have those for both the front and the rear. Again, these are the M95 shocks. So these are a little bit of a nicer shock than the other ones that you can get with this kit. This is going to be a monotube, so you're going to get a little bit more of a comfortable ride out of this shock as opposed to the twin tube or the dual tube, especially when the shocks are really moving when you're doing some higher speed off-road. The kit's also going to come with a track bar bracket for the rear, an adjustable track bar for the front, and some brake line extension brackets for both front and rear. That way you're not going to pull a brake line taut when you are in an off-road flexing situation. So we're going to get it sitting on the ground on 35s, take a look at it and see what we think. So we got the Jeep back on the ground after finishing up the lift kit and have a set of 35s on it, and it looks pretty good. There is a good bit of gap here. Again, Skyjacker says you can run a 37-inch tire with this 3.5 to 4-inch lift kit. We have 35s on it just to see how it looks, just to see what kind of clearance we get. And as you can see, there is plenty of clearance. We took it outside, we flexed it in the same spot that we did when the Jeep was stock on 35s, and we had 0 clearance issues. Absolutely fine. There's definitely enough room for a bigger tire, so let's go ahead and throw that on there. So like I said, Skyjacker does recommend a set of 37-inch tires with this size lift kit, so that's what we threw on there. And as you can see, it looks really good. It actually looks more proportionate than the 35s with the stock suspension. The stance is really nice in my opinion. Everything's a little bit bigger, a little bit beefier, a little meaner looking, and it should perform really, really well for us. As you can see, there's still plenty of clearance between the top of the tire and the fender, even on this non-Rubicon Jeep. There's some clearance to the back of the fender flare here. You're not gonna have any rubbing issues. Even with a factory front bumper, it looks like you would have plenty of clearance. It's not rubbing on the frame, on the control arm. It seems that lock to lock and in a flat or driving scenario, 37s are going to fit just fine. But it is a little bit close in some places, so what I wanna do is take it back out on the hill, flex it out, and see what it looks like in an off-road situation. So we're definitely gonna have a lot more clearance now that we installed the lift over when we had the 37s installed in stock trim. And as you can see, things are still pretty tight. Skyjacker got it right, but just barely. There is a little bit of clearance here. You're not gonna rub too badly on the fender flare. There's still a little bit of space between the bump stop extension and the jounce bumper, so there's a little bit more room for that tire to travel up. So there is still a chance that the tire is gonna make contact here, but in a slow speed off-road situation, are you going to do some damage? Probably not. So let's take a look at the front right and see how much clearance we have up there. As I suspected, there is a little bit more room up in the front here than there is in the back. Again, I took a look at that jounce bumper to bump stop extension clearance. There is a little bit more space, but as you can see, the tire is allowed to move up further and still not hit anything. This was just a little bit of a test in the parking lot here. What I'm gonna do now is actually take this thing out on the trail, flex it out a little bit more, and see how it feels. So here we are out on the trail. We're not gonna do any serious wheeling today. We're not disconnecting sway bars or airing down tires, anything like that. I just wanted to give the suspension a little bit more of a flex test than we could do in the parking lot on that little bit of a hill. So we'll see if we can't get the suspension twisted up a little bit, see how much clearance we have, and just get an overall feel for how the suspension handles off-road. Driving around here on this little fire trail going, pretty slow, between 5 and 10 miles an hour. We're bouncing around a little bit. There's some rocks, there's some roots, but no issues. None of that telltale rubbing sound that you might expect to hear when running a set of 37-inch tires on a Jeep. This 3.5 to 4-inch lift from Skyjacker does provide plenty of clearance for these tires, and you don't have to worry about any sort of rubbing. So that's gonna do it for this video. We took a stock 4-door JL, showed you what it looks like with 35s and 37s on it, then installed a pretty big lift kit from Skyjacker, this 3.5 to 4-inch kit, and threw 35s and 37s back on it. This kit is really well set up for a set of 37s, gives the Jeep an awesome look and some awesome functionality without being too tight and ending up with some rubbing. So make sure you comment below, let me know what your ideal setup would be for your JL, what lift size, what tire size you want to be running, and also make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you can check out some detailed videos on all the parts that we talked about today.